Hi everybody and welcome back to Crafted by Corie. If you're new, I'm Corie. Thank you so much for being here. If you are returning, you all mean the world to me. Today's video is a compilation of all of my Valentine's DIYs that I've done so far in 2022. So let's go ahead and get right on into the crafting.
DIY number 1.
Okay, so I am attempting some watercolor, but with watercolor pencils. I've had these for a while. I have just colored with them, just, adult coloring books. I just enjoy that sometimes. So I did do that with my colored pencils, but this is the first time I am attempting to use water with them. They are watercolor pencils, so they are meant to use water with them. I've just never done it before. So I've got a piece of my watercolor paper that I picked up from that pad I showed you. I think I got it at Michael's, but I've had it in my stash for a while. I just created a heart. I had tested out a couple of colors there on my parchment paper to see which one I wanted to go with. And I picked this deep red tone. So I created a heart. I purposely did not make it completely symmetrical. I wanted it to be a little bit off. And now I'm just taking a paintbrush with water and I'm going to kind of swoosh across it. I was trying to get an idea of what it was going to do. I did want it to be a little bit kind of messy and outside the lines. And I think I kind of expected that it was going to remove that harsh line, but clearly I was mistaken. But you know what? It's okay. Happy accidents, right? This is how we learn how different mediums work and what we can and can't do with them. And, I actually ended up really enjoying the effect, but I just kept coming back in with more water and getting it to where I wanted it. Now I have a Sharpie pen that I'm using, and I'm just taking my time, you guys. This is not my actual handwriting. I am just hand lettering this, but with a very simple font. Very simple. So at the top, I've got love in a script, and now I am just using a very basic, not script font. What is it called when it's not script? Oh my goodness, you have no words, but love is all you need. And I did sign my work. And now I'm pulling out my scrapbook paper and I'm picking out a piece that I can use for a background. I was so excited when I saw this, you guys, because that color matches exactly to the color. Again, it was kismet. It was meant to be. I did go ahead and trim this down to a 10 by 10. Afterwards, I was wishing I had just left it as a 12 by 12 because I ended up wishing I had had more border to work with. But at that point, it was too late. I was committed. So I used my Dollar Tree double-sided tape to adhere it to the background. And then I spent some time trying to figure out what length I needed to make my paint sticks. These are the 5-gallon or 3-gallon? The large paint sticks that you can get at Home Depot. So I went ahead and cut these down. The long edges are 11 inches because I know I need to get better about telling you about the measurements. So once I had that all cut down, I went ahead and glued the corners together. I made sure that everything was square with my little square there. And then I took my not my nail gun, that is a staple gun, and I used 1/4-inch staples to just secure those corners as well. I am going to be painting this, so I went ahead and used some spackle since it's not going to be seen. It dries white, it goes on pink, dries white, so you know when it's dry. And then I went ahead and I sanded that all down and made sure that it was ready for the paint. Now I had intended to do a dry brush effect on this, and I chose the wrong tool. The paintbrush that I had picked up to do this with, it wasn't going to be the dry brush effect that I wanted. So I went ahead and just gave it a basic coat of paint, just a single coat because I knew I wanted to distress it. So I really distressed the edges. I started out with my sanding block and then I found that it was just getting a little bit dull. So I just grabbed a piece of regular sandpaper and I focused a lot on the edges of the piece. And then I also went in along the insides, not insides, but you can see where I've distressed it there. So once I was happy with it, I went ahead and got my little picture secured. I hit a little bit of glue in each of those corners and set my frame down. And then I very carefully flipped it over. It wasn't quite dry enough, but I managed, and made sure that it was nice and adhered. And then I grabbed my little staple gun again and I put staples in all the way around the edges. So I started at the center of one end and then went to the opposite side and just made sure I worked my way around that way. So now I'm going to be taking some of my craft paper and I'm going to go ahead and glue that to the back of my piece so it's nice and finished. If you've been following me for any amount of time, you know I like all of my pieces to be finished front and back. And I'm going to go ahead and apply the craft paper, make sure that that is nice and secure. That was wood glue that I used for that, but you could use regular school glue. It doesn't really matter. And then I'm using my X-Acto knife to trim away all of that excess paper. Now I've got this really pretty cord. It's a white and pink, and I was trying to decide if I wanted to be able to see it or if I wanted it to just be hidden behind, and I decided, you know what, I'm gonna let us see that little cord a little bit. So I stapled it down and then pulled it back the other way. So you can see I'm kind of making it go the opposite way of the way that it's gonna hang. I just feel like it's going to make it a little bit more secure by doing that. So before I trimmed that off, I went ahead and got a little piece of Scotch tape and wrapped that around the cord, and then I cut in the middle of the Scotch tape, and that just keeps it from fraying. So I went ahead and stapled that, and there we go.
DIY number 2.
All right, styrofoam heart. I love all of these styrofoam forms that the Dollar Tree does. I decided I was going to go ahead and sand this though, because there's a ridge all along the sides of the heart. I imagine they have two pieces of styrofoam that they somehow put together. So I gave the whole thing a nice little sanding and made it nice and smooth. It was really kind of cool because it started looking like cement after I put the chalk paint on it for doing this. Excuse me. So it had a really kind of cool look to it. That was my Adirondack white chalk paint. I decided I needed some help with this. I didn't want to just set it down, and I also needed to finish painting it, so I fashioned the foam core with those skewers, and it worked actually really well. So once it was all dry, I went ahead and grabbed one of my napkins from my stash. This, I believe, came from Bed Bath & Beyond. I'm not positive because I've had these for quite some time, but I think that's where it came from. So it's really important that you use just one layer. This was a 3-layer napkin, so I pulled away just that top layer. And now I'm going to prep my design. I am just wetting a paintbrush and using the wet paintbrush to draw an invisible line around where I want to tear it. And then you can see it just tears really, really easily that way. And then once I had that all trimmed away and cut out, I decided to see how it was going to lay on my heart, because with the curves, you just want to make sure that it's going to lay down as flat as possible. And then I made a couple of adjustments as necessary so that I could get it to form to my heart shape without too many wrinkles. Now, one thing I forgot to do was to tear along the straight edges of my napkin. You want to make sure that you do that, and I'll show you in a minute why. But in the meantime, I am putting down a really good layer of Mod Podge. This is a glossy Mod Podge. Mod Podge is also a plaid product, if you didn't know. But I'm covering the entire area that I'm going to be adhering this particular piece of napkin to, stretching it out gently so I don't tear it, and just forming it to my heart. And then I'm starting with some more Mod Podge and working my way out from the center to the edges, just laying that down, trying to help it go where I want it without the wrinkles. You see that straight edge with the flowers there? You want to make sure you tear the edges of your napkin. You don't want straight edges like that because it creates a harsh line. When you tear it, and that's why I don't cut my designs out either. When you tear it, it kind of blends in with the background and it is so much less noticeable. And you will see in just a moment what I'm talking about. I did end up tearing that other side because I noticed that there was some break in the pattern that I didn't like. So you can see it there, I had torn that off. So that side worked out well, but there is that line I'm talking about. I don't like that. Now, I probably could have gone in and sanded that. I wasn't sure what it would do to the shape of the styrofoam, and I would probably have to repaint it. So I decided I was going to just try and go with it. Was hopeful that I'd be able to camouflage it. Didn't really work out that way, but this is the back anyway, so I figured it was going to be okay. So do as I say, not as I do. Make sure you tear all of your edges so you don't end up with harsh lines. But I'm taking another piece of the napkin and just getting this lined up and figuring out how I want it placed, tearing off the excess, trying to figure out how I need to do it to get it to form around those curves. And then I went ahead and I kind of trimmed out a wedge there, trying to get it to form around the side of that heart. So I'm laying it down. It's still kind of bunching a little bit. So I tried taking out a little bit more. But ultimately I realized that I needed to just remove that piece and lay it down separately because it just wasn't laying down flat. And that's fine. It's perfectly fine. So I separated it here and then I'll just lay these pieces down separately. So getting that where I want it. And then I'll go ahead, I'm kind of holding it in place because I don't want to lose my spot there. But go ahead and put some Mod Podge down underneath it. I'll lay it back down over and then I'll come back over it with the Mod Podge to seal it all in. And you can do this with all different kinds of things. I had a pumpkin that I did last year. Actually, I guess it was 2020 that I did that pumpkin, and I was amazed at how much you all liked that pumpkin. And then I had also done a bunny that was really popular. I love the styrofoam products that the Dollar Tree puts out. They have so many possibilities, and I'm already thinking about what I can do with the other foam hearts that I picked up at the Dollar Tree at the same time during a recent haul. That video is over on Come On Over with Corie. If you're interested in seeing that and everything else that I got at the Dollar Tree, I will link that in the description as well. But let me know what you think of this one.
DIY number 3.
Do you remember when I made this heart? Well, I made 2 more, and we are going to be using these to create something else. I thought I was going to use the styrofoam eggs and this floral moss. I ended up using other things, so I'm going to show you in just a second because I saw this sitting on the side. I had gotten it out thinking I was going to use it for a different project that you'll see a little bit later, and then I thought, you know what, this might work even better than those little eggs. So I started clipping the little skewers off of here and I started inserting them into the tops and bottoms of my hearts. So just making sure that that hole is nice and secure and tucking my heart, my little baby heart on top of the other. And then I'm taking the piece that I cut off and inserting that into the top, cutting it at an angle to make it sharp. And then I'm going to add my second heart on here. And then I'm going to do the same thing with another little baby heart. And then finally our third decoupaged heart. If you did not see that video, I will make sure I link it in the description box so you can go and see exactly how I created these hearts with Dollar Tree items. So I've got this all put together, but it was a little bit flimsy, and my initial thought was to use one of these big skewers from the Dollar Tree. I've had this in my stash for a while. So I went ahead and I decided, I'm going to see if I can get it to work with these little baby hearts. I was a little scared it was going to completely mangle the heart. I had extras, so I wasn't worried if I needed to start over with it, but it actually worked perfectly. So I went ahead and tried getting my skewer all the way through the center of two of the hearts, and then I only had to go halfway in through the bottom of the third heart that was going to be on the top. So I just went in from both sides and just made sure that I was coming out at the places that I wanted the skewer to be going. It was not as difficult as I thought it might be. So did the same thing with that middle heart, and then that third heart that's still there on my table to the right, I only had to go in part way. Once I had all of my holes kind of drilled, for lack of a better term, I went ahead and I stacked everything up on my skewer, got everything in where I needed it to go, and then I just slid those back up once I had it as far as it was going to go with that. Now I am grabbing a Dollar Tree flower pot that I had in my stash, and I am going to get this all fancied up a little bit. I'm taking it was a ghost at one point from my very first year doing my channel, and I had taken it apart, and I'm just using this fabric to kind of, it's not really lining it, right, because this is on the outside, but I'm wrapping the pot with the fabric to fancy it up a little bit. So I'm just using a little bit of hot glue on the inside, and it's because that's plastic, I should be able to pull this off later if I decide that I want to use the pot for something else. But I'm just tucking the fabric in and around. I did it at the 4 north, south, east, west points, right? And then I'm kind of pleating it a little bit. I'm sorry you can't really see what I'm doing. I'm just putting a dab of hot glue in underneath the fabric after I've pleated it to just get that to hold. So this was really very simple to do. It did not take a lot of effort or a lot of time, but I thought that the effect was really nice. So I'm just doing that last final pleat, gonna tuck that in, and I'll secure that with hot glue as well. So once I had my pot all dolled up, I went ahead and I grabbed my glass beads. I have a whole stash of these things, and I was using it to weight down the planter, but also to hold my skewer. And this is so tall, you guys. I'm sorry that a lot of it is out of frame. I don't have the ability to, unless I get down on the floor, which I suppose I could have done, but I just don't have enough ceiling height to have my camera up too high, or high enough, I should say, to be able to capture all of this. So you'll get to see it in a few minutes, but I went ahead and put Excelsior around the glass beads to hide them. I would have used a little bit more, but I ran out. And then I've got these faux moss little stones. Those are all Dollar Tree supplies. And the glass stones that I had in there were mostly Dollar Tree also. Now I'm just taking a red satin ribbon and I am wrapping it around the top of my planter, and I'm tying a shoelace bow. It was a very simple thing. So there's my planter, and let me know what you think of this when I show you the final reveal pic here.
DIY number 4.
We are starting out with a couple of Dollar Tree tag signs. I had picked these up last 4th of July time, and I am popping off all of these little stars. They are little metal stars, so I will keep them for a future project. And then I decided I was just going to sand this down a little bit. I am not going to be painting on this side, so this really probably isn't necessary. I just decided that I wanted to do that. But painting these with my chalk paint in crimson and Adirondack white. The one was Waverly, the other was Home Decor. They are both plaid projects. So I'm using my plaid stencil to go ahead and put down some hearts. I'm using the crimson chalk paint again on this. And then I did have a little bit of seepage? I'm not coming up with the right word right now, you guys, but I went ahead and used my white with a little tiny narrow brush there and just touched up some of the places where I had some bleeding. That was the word I was looking for. Now I am taking a mason jar lid, just the metal rim, and I'm using it as a template for my tag holes because I wanted to have like a little grommet looking thing there. So I'm using my folk art brushed metal acrylic paint for that, and I did that on both of the tags. And now I'm just taking a look at how I'm going to have them lined up a little later. I had gone into Canva and just did a happy Valentine's with some hearts, and I just printed that out on my computer. I figured I would give this a shot. I've seen my sweet friend Deirdre on the Upcycled Life do this, and I did it wrong right from here, you guys. I should have painted the paper as opposed to the tag, and I realized that pretty much as soon as I started laying down the Mod Podge. Yeah. So anyway, I'm just improvising here, and I'm going to go ahead and give it a coat of the Mod Podge. This is a matte Mod Podge that I'm using. Just make sure that the whole surface is consistent. And I set that aside to dry for now. I'm coming back in on my other side and just adding some X's and O's. I'm just doing this by hand. You could certainly use stencils, or you could print something out and trace them. I did think about tracing my happy Valentines with the hearts. Well, not necessarily tracing it, but marking it with either pencil on the back and rubbing it that way, or I was also thinking about using graphite paper, but ultimately I decided I wanted to try this method. Now, I do think that this works really well if you have a white background. So with my red background, you can see I've got some residue. I'm not sure if that's Mod Podge or if it's some of the white paper. My guess is that it's retaining some of that white paper. I did try to sand it to see if I could remove a little bit more of that to blend, and yeah, it wasn't working. So I decided, you know what, I'm just gonna go ahead and start over. And so I went ahead and put down a coat of my crimson chalk paint, but I could still see the image through it. So I took that opportunity to just trace over it with one of my paint markers. This is an Arteza paint marker. I have these in my Amazon store if that's of interest to you. In fact, a lot of my supplies are available in my Amazon store, and that link is in my description box. But I went ahead and I traced over everything, and it actually ended up really great. And you can see right now, if you look closely, that I've got a couple of different sheens going on there, and that's because I had put the chalk paint over it again, and I did not go back over yet with the Mod Podge. But do not fear, because I will be going back over this again with another coat of Mod Podge right here, just to make sure that everything is uniform. And it also ended up helping to seal in my design. Once that was done, I came in with some white hearts, just because I felt like the design was a little bit too dark and I wanted something to brighten it up. So I just put some random little hearts all over the little tag. And then I did decide I was going to draw the inside of the hearts there to brighten those up a little as well. And I am absolutely loving this. I hope that you are liking it too. Please leave me a comment. Let me know what you think. So now I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put my tags together. I'm being careful to line them up the way I want them and not cover those holes. We're going to need both of those holes. So just keep that in mind as you are gluing these together. I'm just using hot glue. You can certainly use E6000. Whatever you deem necessary. And then I'm gonna flip this over, and I am grabbing some craft paper to go ahead and cover up the back. Now you could probably do this, you could line them before you put them together. I chose to do it once they were adhered because I wanted the back to look as cohesive as the front. and I'm just applying hot glue along all of the edges, and I'm working quickly because I don't want the glue to cool off too much to grab the paper before I have a chance to lay it down. So I did it in sections and just worked my way around the tags. Sometimes if it cools too much, I do use my heat gun on it, and that will actually melt the glue again. I had a little bit of glue on that parchment paper, so it was sticking to my sign, but we took care of that. Filled in a little gap that I noticed. And then I am just using my X-Acto knife on my self-healing mat. That mat is also from Arteza. And my little X-Acto knife is actually a Cricut tool that is wonderful. I love it. So I'm just cutting away all of that excess paper and making sure that I'm getting the inside of the holes as well. Once that is all set, I'm grabbing my jute twine. This is a roll I had picked up at Walmart. It has lasted me a really long time. I want to say it was only like $4 or something, but it's been great. And these lengths are, I guess, about 30 inches. You can certainly make them longer or shorter depending on where you're going to be hanging your project and how long you want your ribbon to be. But I'm just tying all of those lengths together at the top, and that's going to be my hanger. Now I'm grabbing out my buffalo check ribbon and I'm going to create a bow. So I was looking at it as possibly just the simple bow, and I decided I wanted to make it a little bit fluffier with more loops. So I went ahead and I created a bow with 3 loops on either side. If you are interested in a bow tutorial, I do have one on my channel, and I'll be happy to link that in the description box for you. But essentially I created my loops, 3 on either side, and then I took another little length of ribbon, tied it around the middle. I'm just making sure my loops are staying all the same length, and then tying that off nice and tight. Fluffing up my little bow loops, and then I'll go ahead and I'll attach it to the top, and I'll attach it simply by tying that same tie that we used for the middle. I'm going to tie it around my jute twine below the knot, and that is going to be sufficient to hold it in place. You can certainly use glue on it as well, but it's not necessary. And I'm just going to fluff up my ribbon again, and here we are. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 5.
All right, I have a bunch of Dollar Tree socks. I have my Dollar Tree twine, some Dollar Tree wood cutouts, and some fiber fill here. I'm just going to be cutting up some of these socks. I'm going to stuff my little wood hearts inside the socks. And then I'm pretty much going to form the sock around the wood piece the way that gets the design the way I want it. And then I'm going to glue down one end. And I'm going to be trimming that up. I want it to be very form-fitting, and I'm trying to eliminate as much of the bulk as possible. I want to make this as neat as I can it will be the back of the garland. And typically the way that we use garlands, you don't normally see the back, but I just want it to be as neat as possible, just in case, because I might decide to use this on a tier tray. You never know. But I'm just going to make it as neat as I possibly can and just make sure I've got everything hot glued and secured. And then before I seal up the other side, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stuff it with some fiber fill on the front side only, just make my hearts poofy. So this is a really simple project. I'm just using my scissors to poke it down inside the point part of the heart. And then I'm going to make sure that everything is nice and formed. And I am going to add some more fiber fill. this, like I said, this project is really simple. It just takes a little bit of time and patience to get everything lined up the way that you want it, and to make sure that you're trimming the amount of your fabric or your sock in this case, so that you have enough to cover, but you don't end up with a whole bunch of it bunched up behind your project. So I just took my time. I went slowly. I glued a little bit at a time, and I didn't commit to cutting anything until I got to the point where I was ready to secure that part to cover up all of the other stuff that I was doing, if that makes sense. So here you can see I got it down as much as I could, and then I'm gonna test it, and then I'm gonna figure out how much I want to cut off. The great thing about the socks is that they're stretchy, so if you cut off a little bit too much, you can always stretch it up, like tuck it under and pull it up and stretch it to fit where you need it to go. So once I had that done, I went ahead and I took my twine, and I'm figuring out how long I want it, and then I kind of did a bunch of loops because I wanted to have the same length hangers for all of my little hearts that I'm going to be creating. So I cut those off. I would say they were probably about 8 inches long. I created a loop, tied it off, and then I'm tucking the knot down inside the back of it so that the knot is hidden, and I'm going to add some more hot glue in there. So there it is, super cute, right? And then I just went ahead and I did the same thing with my other socks, and I did a whole bunch of different designs. So I leveraged the Be Mine on the socks. I ended up doing some with the stripes. I have some with the little white socks with the red and pink hearts. I did the other Be Mine that you see there. And I just followed that same method each time, just making sure that I had everything nice and sealed, trying to make it as neat as possible, and trimming where necessary. I am not going to make you sit here and watch every single one of these hearts, but I just wanted to give you an opportunity to see me do one more. And then I went ahead and did the same thing with the rest of them. So adding in this little hanger one more time, knotting that up, and we're going to be speeding through this in just a moment once I have this one put together. So again, just hot gluing it, and then you can pull up the excess of the sock and just make that nice and tight. So here we are with all of the different ones that I had done. I think I might have done one more after that, but then, oh no, I didn't. I moved on to these little hearts. These are from the Dollar Tree, and I'm adding these to my garland as well, just to provide a different texture and some more interest. And I am going to sew these together with some twine. I went ahead first and created a loop at the top that was about the same length as the loops on the others, but I kind of used it as one single piece, so I did not cut that. I created the loop, knotted it off, and then I went ahead and continued with the same length of twine and sewed it around. You certainly don't have to do it that way, but that's what I did. Once I got about 3/4 of the way around, I stopped sewing for a moment and I stuffed it with my fiber fill again, and then I went ahead and I sewed it up the rest of the way. Now, once I had it completely back to my starting point, I went ahead and I knotted it off, and then I hid my end inside the heart. And to do that, I stuck my needle in and kind of ran it through the inside of the heart, came out a different place, and then I went ahead and cut off the length of the twine. And then, as you saw, I did them in pink and white as well. And now I have a whole bunch of mini clothespins from the Dollar Tree, as well as these little wood hearts, which are also from the Dollar Tree. They came in a pack of a whole bunch of little wood pieces of all different shapes and sizes. And I glued the hearts onto the tops of the clothespins. And now I am painting everything with my Cardinal Red acrylic paint. This is a folk art product, which is also by Plaid, because we love Plaid. And so as I was doing this, I was like, I need a solution here to not get paint all over my fingers and yet to get everything covered. So I folded up a piece of parchment paper and then I attached all of my little clothespins to that, which allowed me to finish painting them without making a mess of myself. And I was just afraid that if I let it dry first and then went back, I might end up with a little ridge in my paint, and I didn't want that. So this was my solution for that cute little hack. Once that was all dry, I went ahead and I kind of added little, what are those, polka dots with my white enamel paint. This is also by Folk Art. And then I did that on the first half. On the second half, I created stripes. You can do whatever you choose. You can make different colors. You can do different designs. You don't have to put a design on it if you like them all just a solid color, but use your imagination and make it your own, whatever makes your heart happy. But here they are. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 6.
Okay, for this project, I have these tulips and these wreath forms that I got on Amazon. If you have interest in any of these items, they are in my Amazon store, which is linked in my description box. But I pulled out the largest of the wreath forms. These are obviously heart-shaped, and this one was a 10-inch. And then I'm taking out a bunch of the tulips. I did purchase 2 packs and they had 20 pieces in each pack. I ended up using about a pack and a half, a little less than a pack and a half. But I am literally just wrapping these stems around the wreath form. I'm lining up the little buds where I want them, and I'm wrapping them around the wreath. Now, if I had to do this over again, I think I probably would trim off the stems. I hesitated to do it because they were honestly so pretty. I was afraid to cut them and then be unhappy with the end result. But as I started working my way around and getting closer to the top of my heart, it was getting a little bit bulky. And so, like I said, in hindsight, by the time I was getting near the end, I was thinking, ugh, I really probably should have trimmed these off and maybe used wire to attach them to the wreath form. So if you decide that you would like to try something like this, that would be my recommendation. You can certainly try and do it this way, but I found that they weren't quite as secure the closer to the top I got, because again, just with the bulk and all those extra stems. But the quality of these tulips I thought was really excellent. I was really happy with them. I thought they were beautiful, and the end result was stunning in my humble opinion. So I'm hoping that you are going to like it too. But as you can see, I just continued on around, made sure that it was to the fullness that I wanted it, and just kept on going around the form. I would love to know what your favorite flower is. I'm not even sure if I know what mine is, but I love irises. I do think these tulips are beautiful, but what is your favorite flower? And I'm looking forward to spring, that is for sure. But here I'm working my way around. You can see that they're kind of, as I try to work in these additional tulips at the top there, you can see they're kind of like pulling away, and I just had to keep going back in and adjusting. So now I'm going to go ahead, and I was kind of showing where I was going to be putting a bow and trying to figure out how large my bow might be and what it might be covering up, so I knew whether I needed to add in a few more tulips. So I'm very visual, and I have to kind of picture how things are going to be as I go through here. But I did use some hot glue at the top there just to try to give it a little bit of extra security. And then I set about making my bow for the top. If you are interested in a bow tutorial, I will link that in the description box as well. I'm not going to bore you with the bow making with the step-by-step here, because I'm sure most of you have already seen me do this a lot. But I went ahead, created my bow, and I'm going to attach it to my wreath. I'm just using the centerpiece to tie it around and get it that nice and secure. I did, again, hindsight's 2020, right? I did wish that I had made the bow a little bit smaller because I felt like I lost some of the heart shape, because you kind of lose the top of it. And so hopefully you know what I mean when I'm saying that, but I still thought it was super pretty. Trimming off my ends, just dovetailing those and getting them the way that I want them, fluffing up my bow, and that was it. And so I'm going to create a little hanger now. I basically looped another piece of ribbon and tied a knot, and then I'm going to wrap that around the top of the wreath underneath the bow, loop it through itself to secure it, and then hide that knot behind the bow. So it looks like another loop from my bow that we can use for the hanger, but it's not part of the bow, so it won't put too much strain on the bow itself. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 7.
All right, I have a little foam tree form thing, a couple of socks from the Dollar Tree, and then those hearts. This is the project I thought I was going to use those for, and I ended up not using them. So the little tree form is what I'm calling this, for lack of a better term. I wanted to make sure my sock was going to fit on it, and then I've got another sock, just a plain white one, that I'm going to put around the base, so the bottom. And I'm just going to pull that down over as far as I can go with it so that it's nice and flat on the bottom. I don't want any kind of poofiness happening there because I want it to be able to rest flat on the table. So it's just going to be nice and covered, so it's got a nice fabric outside, but it'll stand up and erect. And I've got this little pouch there that we are going to stuff with some foam, not foam fill, fiber fill. There we go. So I'm just creating a little nose. If you saw the thumbnail for this video, you know that we're making a little gnome. And I'm taking some thread and I'm just wrapping it and wrapping it several times around the base of the nose, pulling it tight, and then I will tie that off. So just taking advantage of the shape of that sock. So that was basically the little heel part of the sock. So tying that off and then just kind of fluffing up the nose. So can you see it? So now I am taking out a bunch of fabric paint. This particular paint is by Arteza, but any fabric paint will do. And after the fact, I was wishing I had just used pink and white, but I ended up putting in some of the orange also, which gave me a little bit of a peachy color. For whatever reason, I had in my head that it needed to be more peachy than pink, but with the other colors that I've got going on with this, I did end up going back and putting more pink in it because I'm looking at the sock next to it. I'm like, oh, that kind of clashes. So you can see I did go back and I added some more pink. I probably, if I had to do it over again, would do it even more pink, but at any rate. Now I am taking a Dollar Tree mop head and I am going to cut off that black plastic thing. You do need something like wire cutters or tin snips. I used my tin snips. I had tried my scissors a second. I started to do that. I thought it was too bulky, and then I got my scissors, went back to the tin snips, snipped that one thing, and then I was able to get all of my strands out with no problem. I took about half of those strands and I was looking at how I might put them on my little gnome, and I decided I was going to cut these all in half. So I went ahead and just individually, because I'm a little particular sometimes, you guys, and so I just wanted them all to be the exact same length, so I did them one at a time. But you can certainly fold them in half and clip them multiples at a time. So now I'm just using the hot glue to attach strand by strand along the top edge of that white sock that we've pulled up over the form, the styrofoam form. And I'm just working my way all the way around. I started at one side of the nose and I worked my way all the way around to the other side of the nose. And then just for some added strength, I went ahead and added some additional glue around the top of it. Because now I'm going to unravel all of these. And I noticed that some of the strands were not fully caught up in that first initial bit of glue that I had put down. So I went ahead and added more of the glue, and then I felt like it wasn't all gonna pull out. Now I'm dividing her little hair and I am braiding her hair here. This is the first time I've done a gnome with braids, so I was really excited to give this one a shot. And I'm tying off the ends of her braids with just some really narrow ribbon. This is a part of a pack that I had picked up on clearance from Michael's a couple of years ago, I think. And snipping off those ends, I just did a regular shoelace bow, and then I did the same thing on the other side, braided it, and then went ahead and tied it off with a bow. You could certainly use a rubber band first. I just decided I didn't want to try to dig out a rubber band that would blend or not show. I think the rubber bands that I had that would have worked for that size were like blue. So I opted not to do that, but you can certainly use a rubber band first. So now I'm starting to play with her hat. And I don't know if you were able to tell, but it kind of got really skinny really fast there. And I'm like, not liking the shape of it really with her hair being there. You see how it's like fat and then it gets really skinny. So I went ahead and cut off the foot part of the sock, and I'm going to put that down first. I was planning on cutting that off anyway, so it was perfect. And now waste not, want not, right? Using that for some added fluff. So adding in the fiber fill to just fill out her little head a little bit more. And I was struggling with getting it to lay the way I wanted it, so I did pull off that little sock foot piece, and I'm gluing the fiber fill directly to the form, and then I'll put the sock back down over top of it in just a second once I have all of that the way I want it. So now her little head is going to be a better shape, and her hat will stay up and nice and fluffy. And I'm just going to go ahead and apply some glue so that that doesn't kind of slip up and off of her little head. I'm just trimming off the very edge here to make sure it's a nice even line, because I'm planning on bunching that up. So pulling this down over the other part of the sock, getting it secured down over her nose, and then I'll go ahead and glue that into place as well as soon as I have it where I want it. Although maybe I tied it off first. I guess I tied it off first. So I'm going to grab a little piece of that same ribbon that I used for her braids, and I'm just going to tie it at the top of her hat. I just thought it would be really cute. I did think about cutting slits into the very top, almost to make like a little pom-pom, but then I opted not to. I kind of liked it the way it was. And here I am going in and securing everything with the hot glue. So now I have an infinity scarf from the Dollar Tree, and it's pretty much sewn into a loop, so I had to cut it to get a flat piece of material. In hindsight, I probably could have just left it like that and used the entire thing, but I ended up using, I think it was maybe just 2/3 of it. But I'm going to tuck it under her little bod, and I'm going to figure out how long it needs to be to go around her once. And then I did about 2.5 times that length. So I went ahead and clipped off the excess and set that aside. And now I'm creating a little seam to put the scarf back together again, right? So now it's going to be a mini infinity scarf, if you will. So starting out with the same shape, or ending up with the same shape that we started out with, but just shorter. So then I folded it in on itself. Once I turned it right side out, I folded it in on itself. So it was almost like not cut, but folded in half, but inward. Hopefully you get what I mean there. And so I'm gonna pull this up around her, and I'm trying to figure out the best way to attach. This is gonna be her little dress or her little skirt. And I finally had the idea that I was going to open it back up again, and I'm gonna get a rubber band to adhere around her middle, about halfway up the fabric. So then we're going to pull the other piece down over top of the rubber band. Hopefully the image is making it clear because I feel like I'm having a hard time verbally explaining what I was doing. But essentially that made like a little dress for her. So, and it's no sew, right? I still have to fix my sewing machine, but that'll be for another day soon, hopefully. Taking some more of that same ribbon, and just below where the rubber band is underneath the fabric, I'm going to tie a quick little bow there and just get her all fancied up, fluffed up her little dress, and then I trimmed off her little hair at the ends of her braids so it's all nice and even. And that's it. I think she's so cute, but let me know what you think.
DIY number 8.
So I have these cute little rolling pins I picked up at the Hobby Lobby, and my chalk paints in white. It's Adirondack white, crimson, and vintage Victorian. So I am starting out with my white. I did the little handles on the first rolling pin, and then I'm going to do the body, if you will, of the second one. Then on the second one, I'm going to do the handles pink. And on the next one, I will do the body pink. You see what I'm doing here? Just kind of mixing it all up. And then I'll do the red on the handles and then on the body. So everything is color coordinated, but each one of these is a little bit different. And then I went into my Cricut design space and I went to find a font, and I'm going to be better about telling you guys what fonts I'm using as I do this here. But I finally settled on DTC Honeymoon, and I went ahead and typed up the words that I want to use for these little rolling pins. I'm going to be creating stencils with my vinyl. If you don't have a Cricut, not to fear, you can certainly use other stencils. You could trace things on that you print off of your printer. You could Mod Podge things on. You can decorate these however you choose. I just happen to have my little joy, so I was creating these little words to use on my little rolling pins, but really the sky is the limit. Just use your imagination. So I've got my Be Mine, my XOXO, and I Heart You. And once I had those all set, I went ahead and got them all situated on my mat. And then I went ahead and cut down my stencil vinyl to the size I needed using my little cutter tool here and making sure that I've got it to the right width. And I don't think I worried about the length until after I had it done. Maybe I did because I can't remember. Yeah, no, I trimmed it off there too. So I got that applied to my mat, and I went ahead and ran it through my little machine to get my stencil all made. So once it had gone through the machine and it was all cut, I trimmed them, not trimmed them, but I cut my little words apart to have separate stencils, and then I went ahead and weeded each of them. So you can see I'm just taking away the actual letters for this project. So it's leaving the stencil vinyl, just the exterior. So I've got my little stencils. And then I will use my transfer tape to apply it to the little rolling pins. Just trying to get that lined up and smoothing it down as best I can. Now I was having trouble with getting all of the edges to adhere to the chalk paint. I don't know if it's because it was chalk paint, if it was because it was curved. I'm not really sure what was going on, but I did struggle with that a little bit. So I wanted to go in and seal my stencils with the same color that I was using on each of these rolling pins before I came in with the color that I wanted to use for the stencil. And the reason I do that, you can do that with Mod Podge as well. And I know people have asked me in the past why I do it this way instead of with Mod Podge. I find that with chalk paint, you can actually see the Mod Podge if you get any bleeding. Whereas if you use your base color paint, it's the same paint, so you don't see it as readily. It's the exact same finish and you don't have to worry about it. So once I had all of my stencils applied, I went ahead and pulled this off, and I had applied my paint a little too thick trying to seal it in the first time. So as I peeled my stencils away, it did end up taking up some of the paint with it. Not ideal, but I was able to go back in and touch it up a little bit here and there. So I just grabbed a really fine paintbrush and I touched it up. So here's another thought. If you don't have a vinyl cutter, you can just use a little paintbrush and paint your little words on here too. It does not need to be perfect. In fact, I have another project a little later in the video where I specifically am not perfect with lines that I paint on a little planter, so to speak. So you'll see that in a little bit. But I went ahead and got the rest of it all weeded out. I'm using my special little tweezers to help me with that because my paint was not completely dry at that point. Once it was dry, I came in with some of this ribbon. I had gotten this at Michael's on clearance in a pack, and it was, I think, 5 or 6 different ribbons that were all color coordinated, but all different, and I love them. And so this is a little pink buffalo check, and I was trying to figure out the best way to do my little bow, and I realized if I tried to do it that way, I was going to end up with 4 tails, and I don't want 4 tails for this particular project. So I ended up doing a little loop, tying a tie around the middle of that loop, and I left the rest of it long. I was going to trim it off once I decided how large I wanted my little loops. So there I'm trimming that off, and so now I've just basically got a loop of ribbon that I tied another piece of ribbon around the center of. So hopefully that makes sense. And then I'm just going to attach this to the side of my little rolling pin with some hot glue. So just going to grab my glue gun, a little tiny dab of glue on the knot of the ribbon, and then I'm going to adhere it to my rolling pin and just fluffing up my ribbon a little bit the way I want it. So there's the first one, and then I did the same thing with the other 2. So same process, created a loop, tied another little piece around the middle of it, and then adhered it. And that third one, I just put the bow on the opposite end just to have a little bit of variety. And that's it. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 9.
So I'm starting out with this heart from the Dollar Tree, and it's kind of cute by itself, but I'm popping off that little metal love, and I'm going to set that aside. I'll keep that for a future project. Taking off the little hang tag, and I'm going to be using the back side of it. I'm going to give it a couple of good coats of my Adirondack white chalk paint. That's by Home Decor. And once that is nice and dry, I'm going to come in with my painter's tape, and I'm lining up my stripes on an angle. So I'm going to put that down. I'm going to use another piece of tape as my spacer. I'm sure you all have seen this done before, but just going to go ahead and keep doing that until I work my way across the entire heart with my little stripes. Now I'm going to come in, this is with Elephant chalk paint. This is also by Home Decor, I think. I use Waverly and I use Home Decor, and I always get confused as to which one is which. Actually, this one might be Waverly, but it's Elephant. They're both plaid products, which is why I also get confused. But I'm just painting away from the edge of the tape because I want to try to do my best not to have any bleeding. So just making sure that is all nice and filled in. And then once that was completely dry, I'm going to come in the opposite way. I'm using my little square right there to make sure that my lines are square with my tape, because I want to make sure that I don't end up with diamond shapes. I want actual squares. So I'm just making sure that my tape is getting done perpendicular, and then I went through and I did the same thing that I did before, but just in the opposite direction. And so in those spaces that are not covered with tape, I'm going to come in with my black chalk paint. This one is home decor, black chalk paint, and I'm just going to fill in each of those squares. And again, as I do this, I am using my paintbrush to brush away from the edge of the tape in towards the center. And it's just because I'm trying not to force paint underneath that tape. So once that was all dry, I went ahead and I peeled away all of the tape to reveal my little stripes. And I find this very satisfying when I pull the tape away and reveal those crisp edges. So I figured I normally fast forward through painting and stuff, but I thought I might share the little reveal here with you for the crisp lines. So once I have all of my tape off, I am going to be coming back in and painting my last checks, if you will. You certainly can come back in once everything is dry and apply tape back over the checks that you've already created. I opted not to do that. I decided I was just going to do my best to do it by hand, just in case I didn't get something lined up properly. I did have a little bit of the paint that got pulled off with the tape. That was the other reason. I was afraid I might damage it. So I'm just touching up the areas that had come up. It was just a little bit here and there. But now I'm going to come in with basically a flat, small paintbrush, and it's fairly firm so that it's going to give me that control for drawing the straight lines along those edges. So I'm just creating my buffalo check. I'm taking my time, making sure that I'm butting up against my black squares and just creating those straight lines that go down from one to the next. And I did that all over the heart. Now there was one edge, I don't know if you see it up towards the top, where I forgot where my line was supposed to be and I started painting more of it. So I'm just going back in with my white and I am touching that up. That's the great thing about paint. If you make a boo-boo, you can just go back and paint right over it. So I've got my buffalo checks. I am loving this already. And then once it was completely dry, I came in with some lamb's ear. This is also from Amazon. If you saw, I did a recent haul for all the stuff that I got off of Amazon, and then those little roses were actually in a Michael's grab box haul from I think it was like last spring. I forget when I did it, but no, fall, I think. It was in the fall. So, but it had spring products in it. So I'm using these items and I'm just going to create I don't even know what you'd call this down at the bottom of the base of the heart, but I'm going to clip off all of the little buds off of my roses, and these were absolutely gorgeous. I was so excited to find these in that box. I did not secure any of those rosebuds down yet. I'm still trying to figure out how I want them. But now I have these, I call these pip berries. I don't know if that's what they really are, but it's basically a little garland, a berry garland that I had left over from the holidays, but I have it in red and also in like a pearlized white. It's almost silvery, but really, really pretty. And I'm just cutting it down into sections of 2 groupings of berries, and I'm tucking that in around the wreath. I had seen something online that inspired me to do this, and I can't remember where I saw it. It was a larger wreath, and it had all of these berry twigs, I guess you can say, coming out around the wreath form in both red and then white. And so mine's a little bit different than what I saw, but I just thought it was sweet and cute and it made my heart happy. So literally and figuratively. So once I had that all done, I'm just trying to figure out where I want to position that on my little wreath sign. or heart sign. So I'm getting everything arranged, trying to figure out how I want to place these roses on, and I decided I was going to start tucking them into the lamb's ear, and I just thought that that was so sweet. It's so delicate looking, and I am loving this. So I went ahead and I hot glued everything down into place, just making sure that everything is where I want it. And the lamb's ear does have wire in it, so it does help you to kind of form it into the shape you want. But then just to keep it where I needed it, I went ahead and those top leaves, I did go ahead and adhere them to the backing. And then figured out where I wanted that other little heart. This was from that package from Amazon as well. It was one of the smaller little wreath forms that came in that package of 4. And I secured it to my backing. And now I'm taking one last piece of the berry garland, and I'm going to make my hanger with this. So I trimmed off the ends so I could poke it through the little holes that I did not fill in. Those were the original holes from this sign. And then I'm bending it up and twisting it around itself. I decided that was a little too long, so I ended up taking that off and I cut it down. I thought I was cutting it to the right size, and then it was too short. Once I tried to put it back in there, I'm like, oh, now it's too short. So I was like, now what am I gonna do? Because this was all of the garland that I had left. So I'm trying to twist it back together and hoping that it's going to look all right, and it just didn't. So I detached it there, and I figured, you know what, I'm gonna just double it up, but a little bit off not completely from end to end. So I did it a little bit off. I don't know, it worked. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 10.
This is the little planter box I referenced just a few minutes ago, and I had gotten this, actually my sister got this for me at Michael's. I don't know what the price was. I think it was maybe $1, maybe $2 at the most, but she had picked it up for me, and I am going to give the entire thing a good coat of chalk paint. This is my Adirondack White by Home Decor. It is a plaid product, and I have gotten it on Amazon. If you're interested in this or any of the other supplies that I use on a regular basis, you'll be able to find those in my Amazon store, which is linked in my description box as well. But I am just going to be painting a very rough stripe all around this planter. I left a little strip of white, and I'm coming in with my vintage Victorian pink, and I am painting that all along the perimeter, if you will. And then I'm going to come in with my red. This is crimson. These are the same colors I used before on my rolling pins, and I am just making really rough lines. It's basically making a striped little planter, and this was called a planter. I didn't make that up. That's what it said on it, so that's how I'm going to use it. So I've got my floral foam, and I cut a block of that down to size. I'm putting some hot glue, if I can get my gun working there, in the base and setting my foam down inside just to keep it from moving around. And then I have these little faux moss stones that I was going to put in there, and then I decided I wanted to put some other things in there before I set the stones in. So I grabbed some of my floral moss. This is from the Dollar Tree. So were those little stones. The little moss stones are also from the Dollar Tree. And I'm just covering up my floral foam, kind of camouflaging that a little bit. And then I have one of my little styrofoam balls, also from the Dollar Tree, that I am putting on a little skewer stick, also from the Dollar Tree. I'm using one of my Arteza paint markers to paint that little dowel. I think it was called khaki. It's just a light brown color. I added some hot glue into the hole I had created and then stuck that dowel back in there. So now I'm taking more of my moss, and I'm just going to kind of break it up a little bit, make sure that it's not real chunky, no huge pieces. I'm liberally applying hot glue to my styrofoam ball, and as you can see, I'm just rolling it in the moss, and I'm going to get this completely covered with the moss. Then I'm going to take these little foam roses. Actually, I guess I'm going to measure that first. No, foam roses first. Okay. So taking these foam roses that I had left over from another project from last week's video, and I am going to just put a little teeny dab of glue on the back of each of these roses, and I am applying it to my little moss-covered foam ball. So I just kind of spread them out here and there sporadically. Now I'm going to measure my little dowel and or skewer, and I'm going to press it down into the foam core. And now I can add in my little stones. You can do as few or as many of these as you want. You could even not do any of these little stones, but I just thought that they were sweet and cute and gave it a little bit more interest. So I decided to put them in there. Now I have this little pick. I believe this was also from the Dollar Tree. I've had it in my stash for a while. It was really, I got it at like Christmas time, but like 2 years ago, Christmas time. And I just put a little dab of hot glue on the end of that so that I wouldn't lose one of those little balls off of the wire. Sometimes they slide around, and I'm just kind of twisting it to make a curlicue of sorts and tucking it down into the floral foam at the base of the little mini tree trunk, if you will. I just felt like it needed something extra, and I wanted to put something around that little trunk. You could also wrap little pip berries around it, something like that. I thought about doing that, and then I decided to go with this instead. And that's it.
DIY number 11.
All right, I have some wire from Amazon again, and then this burlap ribbon I had picked up from the Hobby Lobby a while back, and I'd gotten it 50% off. I think it was originally $7.99. So I'm just taking this wire, and this is very pliable, and I went ahead and I kind of just eyeballed the length of it. If I had to guess, you know what, I did not measure it. I'm sorry if you'd like to know what the length was. I am so visual, you guys. I'm really bad about measuring things sometimes. If I had to guess, I would say it was probably 4 to 5 feet long. Now, I will tell you, this roll of burlap ribbon that I just kind of, you saw how I kind of wove it onto my wire, that was 15 feet long. It was not enough to do this the way that I had originally planned to do it. I wanted to create a heart shape with this all bunched up. I definitely would have needed a second thing of the burlap ribbon. So I pulled it all off of there, and I decided, you know what, I'm going to weave it in through just the bottom. And I figured by doing that, it was going to gather less tightly. It's still going to be gathering, but it won't need as much material doing it this way as the way that I was doing it. So I'm going to go ahead and weave it all the way through to the end, and once I have the end, I've got all of the ribbon on there. I'm going to just kind of spread it around, make sure that it's nice and even, and then I'm going to trim off that excess wire. So ultimately this was probably more like 3 feet long, I would guess. And then I'm going to twist that wire, and using my little pliers also, just make sure that it's nice and secure, and then I'm going to tuck that down in and under itself so that it's not poking anything. Then I'm going to cover it up a little bit with the burlap fabric or ribbon, and then I'm going to make my little heart shape. So just fluffing that out a little bit, and then I'm going to go ahead and make a bow for the bottom of that. I've got my Kirkland's ribbon here that I had picked up around the holidays, and again, I'm not going to go through all of the details on the bows, but if you are interested in a bow tutorial, please feel free to check that out. The link is in my description box. And going to get this bow all set to add to my would you call this a wreath? I guess I'm going to call it a wreath for lack of a better term. But getting this all set, I'll get it all fluffed up and I'll attach it to the bottom of the wreath. Now, when I did this and attached it, once I had it on there, I felt like it wasn't enough. I felt like this needed something else. I'm fluffing and feeling like, you know what, it's just missing something. So I went ahead and I took that off, and I did end up creating a second bow. So here I am just taking it off and then I pulled out this burlap ribbon. This is also from Kirkland's, and went ahead and created another bow, same exact style bow, and then fluffed that up. Once I had that ready to go, I took the original bow and I attached that to the center of the second bow. So, and that second bow was a little bit larger than the first, and it was a wider ribbon, so it automatically made it a little bit fuller. And then I got that attached to the wreath and fluffed it up, and now I've got the same exact ribbon but in a narrower width, and I'm going to create a little hang loop for it. So just trying to figure out exactly how long I want it to be, trimming that off to where I want it, and then I'll just use some hot glue and I'm attaching it to the area where the wire goes through, so it's nice and hidden and it's got something pretty solid to adhere to between the burlap ribbon and that wire that's in there. And that is it. Let me know what you think of this one.
DIY number 12.
All right, this is a little, what would you call this? Box? It's not really a box. My sweet subscriber Rose sent this to me in a huge stash of crafting supplies. That's the word I wanted. As you saw, I gave that a coat of the white Adirondack as well, and now I am using these little stickers from the Dollar Tree. These are wood stickers, and I'm painting the 3 natural tone ones red because they are all the same size. I needed 3 the same size, and I'm going to go ahead and create another stencil for myself. I didn't go through the motions on how I created this one, but I am just showing you that I used my Explore 3 for this one. Again, you could hand draw these. You could print something out on your word processor and trace it onto your project. You could Mod Podge things. You could use stickers. You don't have to have a vinyl cutter in order to do this. But I went ahead and got my vinyl tape out and got my stencil, that was the word I was looking for, all transferred over. I'm just lining it up onto my, what do you call these, you guys? It's not a frame, but anyway, I got that all transferred over, and once I had done that, it did, again, I was struggling a little tiny bit with getting it off. So I did set down a piece of the backing for my transfer tape, so if I had to lay it down again, it didn't go back and stick to my stencil again, because I was struggling with that a little bit. But I finally got the job done. I put some parchment paper over top of it and burnished it again just to make sure that it was all really nicely on there. And then I went in with my white paint again to seal my stencil. Same reason that I'm not using the Mod Podge for this. I just don't like the effect that it gives when you get a little bit of leakage or seepage. This time I did a very thin coat, and I'm doing almost like with a dry, I want to say brush, that's not a brush, it's a makeup sponge. I just cut these makeup sponges down that I get from the Dollar Tree into little pieces, and I use them for my stencils. But I went in with a very dry sponge, and I gave it a couple of coats, and that worked amazing, and I had no issues at all none. So it looked super pretty, and then I can go ahead and I can apply my little red heart stickers. Again, these are wood and they just have little foam tape, double-sided tape on the back of them so you can adhere them to your project. I love it. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 13.
All right, I have had this in my stash for a while, and then I've just recently picked up these foam roses at the Dollar Tree. The love is also from the Dollar Tree. I love these little roses. They are so pretty. I don't even know how to describe them. They do not look cheap at all whatsoever. They look lush and pretty and full and just so soft and velvety. I love them, but I'm essentially just going to fill in this, I'm calling it a wreath form. I'm not sure if that's what you would call it, but I'm filling in this wreath form with my little roses, and I'm going to alternate. Look at how pretty those are, you guys. I just love these so much. I'm gonna have to see if I can find more of these. I know that they've had them in a larger size as well. I did not find the larger size. I only found the small ones, and I picked up 6 little bags of them. I picked up 3 pink, 3 red. I didn't think it was going to take that many to complete this project, but I pretty much used all of them. So this is more like a $7 project, but I think it's so sweet. Now the V and the E I was looking at and I was like, they're kind of globbed together there. So I do have a solution for that. But first I went ahead and tied off some more of that cord. It's the same cord that I used on the last project, and I'm using that as my little hanger. So I'm thinking about what I'm going to do here because I felt like it needed to be a little bit more defined. Watching on the video now, it looks more defined to me than it did in person, but I went ahead and I just used a little bit of my white Adirondack chalk paint and just defined the tops of the letters a little bit more so you could see what it was. And that's it.
DIY number 14.
Okay, this time I have a whole bunch of wooden beads from Amazon. I was also showing you some little heart keychains that my sister had picked up for me from Michael's again last year. I'm separating out, I've got 15 beads that I'm putting in each of these little sandwich bags. I saw somebody else do this a long time ago, and I cannot remember who it was. It might have been Wendy from White Sparrow Living, I'm not positive, but I thought it was a really great idea. So I'm just adding a little bit of paint to each of my bags, and again, these are the same colors that I've been using for all of the projects, so I'm keeping that same red, white, pink theme for my tier tray that we're going to be decorating later. But then I went ahead and I squished them all around and got everything coated for all 3 of these. Now, I highly recommend continuing as soon as you're done squishing them around. Unfortunately, I got a little interrupted and my paint started drying on them. So yeah, there was definitely some excess paint, so you can see me like running them around on my parchment paper trying to get some of the excess paint off. I finally got smart and got a paper towel and started rubbing each of them individually. But because I'd gotten interrupted, the paint was not as smooth on my beads as they will be on yours if you take my advice and don't let them dry out. So now I'm taking one of those heart keychains and I'm removing the keychain part from the heart. These are wooden, the hearts are, and I'm going to give this a coat of my Adirondack white chalk paint on both sides, and then I scuffed the edges to distress it a little bit just to make that a little bit rough. Now I've got my Arteza paint marker, in red. I'm trying to remember the name of this particular vermilion, something like that. But I am creating my little love word. This time, obviously, I am hand lettering this. I went back and made all the letters a little bit thicker. And then later on, I did go back in and add some white back to the center of that heart. I decided I didn't like it all filled in like that. So in my final reveal of this, you'll see that that actually has a white heart in the middle of it. Now I am taking some butcher's twine. This is from the Dollar Tree. This was a great find. There's a ton of it on this spool, and I was very excited to have found it. But threaded it onto a large needle. I think this is called an embroidery needle. And I threaded my little beads once they were all dry in a pattern, just red, pink, white, red, pink, white. And I just kept on going all the way to the end. And then I added on my little love heart. Looking at it now, I'm realizing that I did it the opposite of what I wanted to do because my heart was white, so I wanted to end with a red bead. So I literally did the opposite of what I meant to do. But oh well, I was probably thinking I was going to attach it to the other end when I started. But this is the way I did it. So I got that all tied off, and then I ran my needle back through the last 3 beads so that we can hide our thread or string or butcher's twine, whatever you want to call this. So I trimmed that off, and now it'll be hidden inside those beads. So I ran all of the beads back down the length so that everything was nice and snug. And then I decided I was going to make a tassel for the other end. If you are interested in seeing complete instructions on how I create my tassel, I will make sure that I link that video in my description box where I go through the step-by-step. But then I went ahead and I had not tied off the top of this tassel yet because I decided I wanted to use the string from the garland to do that. So I ended up looping that through there and tying it off that way. And then once I had it all knotted and secured, I did the same thing, running the twine back through those last 3 beads before trimming it off. Now I'm cutting all of my loops, and then I'll go ahead and I'll pull everything up together, and I will trim it and give it just a little bit of a haircut so it's all nice and even. And that's it. That is it. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 15.
Okay, I have some wood that I picked up at the Home Depot. These are 2 feet long, and I believe they're a half inch, no, 3/4 inch thick. They were $2 a piece at my Home Depot. I am marking these off at 12 inches, 10 inches, and then 8 inches, and I'm just cutting them down on my little miter saw. You can certainly use a chop saw if you have one, but I just did it by hand because I didn't feel like going out in the cold in the garage to use the big saw. So a little bit of elbow grease, and then I just sanded off the edges to make sure everything was nice and good to go. I have my crimson chalk paint. Then over on the other side, my white Adirondack, and my vintage Victorian is the pink shade. These are, I guess, the white and the pink are both Home Decor, and the crimson is Waverly. They are all plaid products, just in case you're looking for anything similar. But I did a very rough brush, dry brush on each of these, and then I applied some stencils that I had created with my Cricut. You can use any type of stencil. You can trace words on here. You could hand letter if you prefer. Don't think that you can't do this project if you don't have a Cricut. You absolutely can. There are so many ways to get words on here. I just happen to have the Cricut, so that is what I chose to use. But I'm using a very dry sponge method here for the stippling of the stencils, for the stenciling. So I'm using makeup sponges that I've cut down into little pieces, and you can see I'll pick up paint and then I'll kind of tap it on my parchment paper, and then I stipple it down. And I did 2 coats. And I found that this worked really well to avoid bleeding. Now, if you don't want to be so careful with it, you can certainly put down Mod Podge first, but if you do that, you're probably going to want to coat the entire project with Mod Podge afterwards, because if you have any kind of bleeding with your Mod Podge, you'll be able to see that against the chalk paint. It gives a different sheen, if you will, even if you use the matte. So just be aware of that. But now once I have everything weeded, I'm going to go ahead and use my Gorilla Wood Glue to connect these. And now I'm putting the glue on the base of the shorter piece so that I don't end up adding too much glue beyond where the wood would be applied. Hopefully that makes sense. And then I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't putting on too much glue so that I didn't have it oozing. Now, this is a stencil I have had in my stash for years. I mean, we're talking like 20 years. So it is a plaid stencil. I only know that because it has plaid kind of pressed into it, like embossed into the corner. So I do know that it's a plaid stencil. I don't know that they still make this one. So any kind of stencil with flowers will do. It does not need to be this exact stencil. And you can tell I'm even just using one little part of the stencil. So that's my crimson chalk paint again with the rose, and now I am using moss for the green. And I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing on the other side just for some balance and symmetry, because I kind of like that. And once I had that all done, we were good to go. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 16.
All right, I've got this cute little glass bottle from the Dollar Tree. I have some red, what is that? Food coloring, yeah, and some water, also my joy. So I came in and I was looking for just a love something. So they've got a whole bunch of different options in here. Of course, in the end, I ended up going with that very first one. I was paused at the beginning there because I was looking at it and I really liked it, but then I wasn't ready to commit. So I went back through, but of course, that very first one I ended up going with. So I got that all sized the way that I wanted to. And then I got it all cut out. And once it was cut, I trimmed off the excess vinyl that I didn't need in case I needed a small piece later on. And I weeded all of my little letters. Got that all situated. I don't know if you all enjoy weeding if you do have a vinyl cutter. I find it relaxing. It's kind of fun, usually. Every once in a while it can be stressful if there's a piece that doesn't want to cooperate, but I actually find it fun. But I love these letters. I love this little font. It's so delicate and pretty. But I went ahead and burnished that and got that onto my transfer tape so that I could go ahead and get that onto my little glass jar, bottle. I'm not sure what you would want to call this. Got that all lined up and I pressed it right on. I did clean the glass with some rubbing alcohol before I went ahead and applied this, just so you know. It's best to make sure that it's nice and clean before you put your vinyl down. So there's my little jar. Now, again, you could decorate this with a lot of other things, but I went ahead and I filled it about halfway with water. I've got my food coloring. I am dropping in just 3 drops or so, added some more water, put in some more drops to get it to the color that I wanted it, a little bit more water, just so that it was above the top of the love so you can see the love against it. Such a simple, easy little project, you guys. Now I've got a little tag and one of my Dollar Tree markers. It's maybe a rose gold color, I would say. And I'm writing number 9. Leave me a comment if you know what this is, because my husband and my daughter didn't know what it was. I felt vindicated when my sister knew what it was, but leave me a comment and let me know if you know what I am making here, what this is supposed to be, okay? But I went ahead and I kind of looped the tag around my fingers because the string wasn't long enough to do it around the jar. So that was how I wanted to attach it at any rate. But I went ahead and used a little tiny dab of hot glue just to get the tag to sit where I wanted it. And that is it. I thought I was being very clever, but let me know if you know what this is.
DIY number 17.
Okay, I've got another one of these little box frame things from my sweet subscriber Rose. Again, I don't even know what to refer to this as. A little wooden bin? I don't know. But I cleaned it up with some rubbing alcohol again, and then I gave it a good coat of chalk paint. This time I decided that I really wanted to keep the wood color, wood effect, whatever you want to call it. I wanted the wood grain to still show on the sides of my, I'm going to call it a box for lack of a better term. So I was just very careful with the chalk paint and just made sure I went just the edge and preserved the edges. You can certainly tape that off if you feel the need to do that. Here I am back in the Cricut studio. This was like a Cricut day for me today. This is not sponsored by any means. I just really like my Joy. It makes things really easy. And I would have used the Joy for the other project too, but I needed a larger piece of vinyl, so I had to pull out the Explorer. But at any rate, I was looking for a February 14th or a 14, and then I ended up just going with what is that? A font instead. And you can see I had picked out a couple of different heart wreaths. That was what I looked for, something that could be cut as a heart wreath, and I hadn't decided which one I wanted to use, so I was just playing with it a lot. You'll see I went through a few different fonts before I settled on one. For me, a lot of this is trial and error. I am very visual, and so I like to try different things out. You can see Elfie, that was the one I finally settled on. And so I'm just lining it up and getting it positioned inside my wreath. And then I duplicated it, and I went ahead and dropped it inside the other one so I could see which one I liked better. I liked the original one, so that was the way I went. So I went ahead and I grouped these together, and then I took a look at the layers because I wanted to make sure they were going to cut properly. I selected the two that I wanted to cut out in black, so you can see those are highlighted in green, and then I welded them. I clicked on weld under actions, and that told it that I wanted those to cut together. So now you can see they're here together on the black vinyl. And I'm going to go ahead and get those cut out on my little Joy. So I was telling it to connect and to cut, and it prepped it. So now it's cutting, went ahead and got that all taken care of. And then when it was done with that, it went and showed me that it was ready to cut the red, and so I did the same thing and let it know that I was ready to go, and it went ahead and cut my red. So once I had everything cut out, I went ahead and I trimmed off my extra vinyl, you know how I like to do that, and then I went ahead and weeded everything out. So here you can see this is all of the black vinyl that's coming away. And then with the red, I decided I wanted to cut out the middle of that little wreath because, again, I want to preserve the vinyl. You know, I can use some of these little pieces for other projects here and there where I only need small bits and pieces, right? And so I like to keep that stuff. So I had used my little X-Acto knife from Cricut to cut that out. So now I just weeded it the rest of the way, got my transfer tape out. I love the lines on the transfer tape because they help you line everything up and get it even. And then I just kind of taped down the edges of this other vinyl, just the backing, so that it wasn't popping up on me when I went to try to add the second one down. So I'm going to come on in, get everything lined up. I did not use registration marks for this. So I'm just eyeballing it and making sure that I've got it the way that I think it needs to be. Coming in, I'm trying to burnish just the red because I don't want to have to remove again the black, if that makes sense. So lining everything up and getting it centered on here as best as I can, using those lines to help guide me as well, because I know that I have my 14 lined up on there. So burnished it, and then I just peeled everything away. I did end up taking a little bit of my chalk paint off there because I probably should have let it dry a little bit longer than I did, but I was able to go back in with a little bit extra paint and fix that in a second, you'll see. So I just burnished it really well again with the backing from my transfer sheet, and I touched it up with some white paint, and it was good as new. But let me know what you think of this one.
DIY number 18.
So I have a love sign from the Dollar Tree, and then this is another piece that I'd gotten in one of those Michael's grab boxes. It was something like $20 originally, and I had gotten that whole box for $5. I had been trying to decide whether I wanted to keep the flower background or if I wanted to get rid of it. So at first I was opting to keep it. And then I'm just painting over with my vintage Victorian. That took, no joke, you guys, about 4 or 5 coats. So it took a while to get that covered with the light pink color. But in the meantime, I went ahead and I used my crimson chalk paint to give one good coat on the love sign. And then on the original frame, I came back in and I'm using my Arteza Gold acrylic paint. I just wanted to brighten it up a little bit, and then I also came in and brightened up the white frame. It just looked a little bit dingy to me, almost like it had been sitting out on the shelf for quite some time, which is probably why it was in my grab box. But I just went over it with some Adirondack white chalk paint, and it brightened it up so much. It made such a big difference. I was actually pretty surprised. And so I'm still sticking with the flower background for right now, but I ended up ultimately not keeping it. So as you watch this, let me know what you think of the design and whether you would have kept the flowers or if you would have painted over them. It definitely would have been easier had I painted them before. But now you can see I'm using these little half beads. These are also from Amazon. They'll also be available in my Amazon store. And I'm putting them into a little Ziploc bag, dropping in some paint, and then one of my sweet subscribers had suggested that I add a little water to it. Last time I tried to do this, she had let me know that it works better if you add some water, so I did that. I'm emptying it out onto a paper towel just to get some of the excess paint off, and then I went ahead and I moved them over onto my parchment paper, and I just touched them up a little bit with my paintbrush just to make sure that they were nicely coated and smooth and not gloppy. Once those were completely dry, I'm going to bring them back over and place them on my love sign. I got them all the way that I wanted them, and once I had them where I thought that I wanted them, I came back in with my hot glue and got them all secured. And this just makes me happy. I just smile when I look at this. I don't know why. I just think it's fun. So then once everything was set, I went ahead and started to apply it to my sign. And I was still debating with myself over the flowers. I don't know. I thought maybe it would add some more interest. But then when I got this on here, I don't know. It's funky. I guess it could be fun, but it was a little much for me. I felt like maybe it was clashing a little bit, and so I did go ahead and I painted over it with just my Adirondack white. Let me know what you would have done. Did you like the flowers there? Do you agree with me that it was too busy? I don't know. I guess maybe I'm more of a plain Jane kind of girl, so one of my artistic friends might say, "Oh no, it was fun," and I don't know. I don't have an eye for it, but let me know what you think.
DIY number 19.
This is another Dollar Tree sign I had picked up last year around this time of year, and I am gonna pull it all apart and then I'm gonna sand it down. Now this time I will be painting on this side, so I do need to make sure that it is nice and sanded down and smooth and cleaned up. And I'm going to be craft paper that. Lining, that was the word I was looking for. Oh my goodness, you guys. I went ahead and I lined all of my little pieces, and now I've got the front side of it here that I'm working with. I'm filling in that little hole, and once my spackle was dry, as you saw, it went on pink and it dries white. I sanded that down, and now I'm using my crimson chalk paint again by Waverly, and I'm going to go ahead and give those 2 coats. Now I am grabbing a couple of paint sticks. I was just trying to figure out where I needed to cut this off so that it will cover all of my little pieces, but also I'm cutting it at an angle so it fits properly at the base there. So you can see how I did that. I essentially just cut off the little handle and it was fine. Now this is my vintage Victorian paint, also by Home Decor. So once I had all of the pink applied, I'm using these little wooden blocks as spacers. These aren't going to be part of my project, but I'm using them to just make sure I have all of my pieces equally spaced before I apply my little, what would you call these? My backers. Now you can see I got some red chalk paint on my liner. I should have lined it after I had painted all the pieces, so word to the wise, you might want to paint first and then line. So I end up fixing that later, but I'm going to go ahead and mark pencil marks here so I know where to put down my hot glue to adhere my, what would you call these, braces? Whatever you want to call them. So I went ahead and marked those, put down my hot glue, and then applied these to the back. And the reason I had painted them pink is you are going to see little bits of this from the front. And if you've watched my channel for any length of time, you know I like having everything finished. So here I am fixing this. I ended up just painting the whole back pink, you guys, because yeah, can't be having little splotches of red on my craft paper. So I gave that a couple of coats and it made my heart a little happier. And this way too, if you have it on a glass door and somebody sees the back of it, you know, it's done and it's pretty. And of course I got a little bit of paint on this side too. I went back in and I touched that up with some of my red chalk paint, and all was well once I had that all set and done. Just used my heat gun to help dry it, and that's it. Now I wanted to have a sponge and I could not find a sponge that I wanted to use, so I just crumpled up a piece of parchment paper for this, and I'm using some more of my pink paint, almost like a dry brush, but dry parchment paper method. I don't know, but I just liked the effect. I wanted it to just be kind of a pounced effect on the edges of my heart. And now I'm coming in with one of my Arteza paint markers, and I am just going to hand letter this. If you are interested in a hand lettering tutorial, I also have one of those on my channel, and I will leave a link for that in the description box as well. but I am just taking my time. This is sped up by about 3 times, so please don't think that this is my handwriting. It is not. I am drawing these letters on here, and I'm just really taking my time and using that faux calligraphy method that I go over in the tutorial. So once I had that all set, just filling these all in a little bit. And you can also, again, you can trace something if you want to print it out. Oh, and I was having a little bit of trouble. I'm wishing that I had coded this. I actually had done this project before I did the tag project, and I learned from this one. That was why I put the Mod Podge down before I started putting white down on my red tag in that last project, because when I started applying white paint on the red chalk paint, it was turning my paint pink. So I did go ahead and coat it with a clear coat afterwards just to protect it. But I had gone back in with my white acrylic paint just to make it more white as opposed to pink for my words there. And I'm just using this cord that I had picked up on clearance from Michael's last year. I just think it's so pretty. It's a white and pink cord, and I'm using that to create a hanger on the back. I'm just pulling that up to make sure it's going to hang properly, and I decided I was going to give it a little extra support at the top there, so adding a little bit more hot glue. And there you have it. She is all done, and I love her. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 20.
All right, I have this piece of molding that I got at Habitat for Humanity for $2. I went ahead and I cut it down with my miter saw, and I'm just cleaning up the edges, making sure everything is nice and smooth, and then I'm going to piece it together. These ended up being about 11.5 inches long each. It was just because that was how my piece of molding was able to be divided. I cut it into 4 equal pieces essentially. And now I'm just using my Gorilla Wood Glue to glue it all together, making sure that everything is nice and lined up to create my frame. Once that was set and dry, I flipped it over and I went ahead with my staple gun and I gave it a couple of staples to each corner just for some added support. So now I'm going to pull out some of my chalk paint. Oh, before I did that, actually, I noticed that it was already a little banged up, so I decided, you know, I'm going to distress it a little bit more. In hindsight, I was kind of wishing that I had done this after I painted it, because the paint kind of didn't go into all those little holes. But I've got my Adirondack white chalk paint, and I am just using a chip brush and going over this with a very dry brush to just get it to where I wanted it. I wanted this to look distressed. I wanted it to look older. And so I just kind of went with it until it looked the way that I wanted it. After I used the Adirondack white, I actually did come back in with a second color. I'm pretty sure it was Mineral that I pulled out, and you'll see that in just a second. I ended up using the same exact brush, and I did the same process. So here it is, and just went back over it, and it kind of knocked the white down a little bit, also made it look a little bit more aged. But I loved the effect. So hopefully you like it too, but let me know what you think of this, and how do you like to distress things? Do you use the chip brush like this? Do you tend to give it a painting and then go in with sandpaper? What is your favorite way to distress? So now I've got more of these. I've got another one of these little wreath forms, but then also a couple from the Dollar Tree. I ended up not using them. At first I thought I was going to do the trio, and ultimately went with just the one. And I'm looking for a ribbon. I pulled out a silver ribbon from the Dollar Tree, and then I pulled out a few pink ones. Those are all 3 from a pack I'd gotten from Michael's a while back. And I decided pretty quickly that I liked the pink more than the silver for this particular project. So I'm trying to decide between buffalo check or the little stitched or the polka dots, and ultimately I went with the stitched. I just thought that it looked nicest with what I was trying to accomplish. I did consider just tying the bow directly right there, but then ultimately decided that I was going to have more control if I pieced it together. So I'm creating a loop. I'll go ahead and cut that off, and then I'm going to cut a second one the same length so that I am hopeful that I'll have, you know, the same thing going on with both of those little bumps in the heart, if you will. So I'm going to loop those over, get them situated. I do like to put my ends underneath each other, like you can see what I'm doing. I kind of fold them over themselves just to make sure I've got clean edges, just in case anything ends up sticking out. And I went ahead and secured that and then did the same thing on the other side. So just getting my loops set. They were not attached to the frame with hot glue. They're just looped around the top of that frame right now. And then I went ahead and tied a cute little shoelace bow, tie your shoelace bow if you want to say, and went ahead and trimmed that off. I was going to trim those tails a little bit more a little later, but I created a second bow that's the same size, and then I'm going to go ahead and secure those to the little loops there, just at the top of where they're secured to hide that seam. So I went ahead and did that on both sides, and then trimmed off all of my little tails. I just think that this is so sweet. I love the way that this looks. So once I had that done, I went ahead and flipped it over, and I decided I was going to secure that ribbon so that the little bows don't end up, you know, sliding around and going elsewhere. And now I just am taking some wire that I had in my stash, and I'm going to create a little hanger. I was able to stick it down through underneath one of those staples on the one side. On the other side, I did end up needing to put in an extra staple because I couldn't get it under there, but it worked out just fine. And I just made sure everything was nice and tight and wrapped around and not poking out. My little wires are poking in towards the wood, so it won't damage my wall, and that's it. Let me know what you think.
DIY number 21.
Okay, I missed somehow the footage where I actually painted this little Dollar Tree sign white. It already had the gold trim on it, but it's just this little sign that had a white background with black writing on it. I don't even remember what it said. It was some sort of an inspirational message, but I painted it with my white Adirondack chalk paint, and now I'm going over it with my Mod Podge. And the reason I'm doing that is I'm going to be taking a black marker to it, and sometimes with the chalk paint, the marker starts picking up the paint. So I wanted to protect the paint. I was making sure it was all dry, and now I'm coming in with oui, oui, oui. If you're not familiar, oui means yes in French. I saw this on Modern Glam. I believe she has a blog, and I am going to leave a link in my description box so that you can check out the decor that she had in her blog. But I just saw it online. I thought it was super cute. I am not showing you the picture just because I don't want to infringe on any sort of copyright. So I am going to just point you to her website for you to check it out. But I am just going through and writing the word "we" all over the it's not a canvas, but you know what I mean. And I'm doing it randomly in different sizes. When I first started, I was going across in rows, and I was like, you know what, that's not random enough. So that's why I'm kind of bouncing around all over the place, just trying to get it the way that I want it without overdoing it. So there we are. And I think it's cute, but let me know what you think. Okay, everybody, that's it for today. Thank you so much for watching and for being here all the way through to the end. If you haven't already subscribed, I hope you'll consider doing that and come back and visit with me again sometime soon. Until the next time, be well, be kind, and make it a great day. Thank you so much for watching. Take good care. Bye.